And I'd like to also welcome back the online participants. I think that the day is just starting for them. This is the Plenary 4 session. These are the roundtable takeaways. And what we want to do in this session, because the roundtables are happening at the same time, we can't be in two places at once. There's no opportunity for us to learn from the other roundtables. So we want to bring everybody together, not just so that we can learn what happened in the roundtables that we were not able to participate in, but also to kind of bring together synergies from across the roundtables and see if we can coalesce around some actionable points and commitments towards the achievement of the priority actions for enabling readiness for resilient recovery. And of course, for the online participants who were not able to attend any of the roundtables, this is also to help get them caught up. I'd like to welcome the rapporteurs from the 4 roundtable sessions to the stage. Ms. Ipsita Sarkar, the regional lead for Asia Pacific and Europe for the Global Network of Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Reduction, GNDR. Mr. Nagami Kozo, specially appointed professor, Tohoku University. Mr. Akashi Masato, chief project manager, Pacific Consultants. And Ms. Mona Chabra Anand, the technical lead for resilient recovery with ADPC. And I will be facilitating the report back session. So, our 4 distinguished rapporteurs, you have an unenviable task because I hope everyone else felt the same, but the roundtables that I sat in on were extremely rich with the discussions. There was a lot of experience shared. A lot of really interesting topics came up and questions. And it's really difficult to summarize, but we're going to try to take it in pieces. And you're going to have help from the audience. So we'll do some reporting back from the rapporteurs, and then we're also going to invite the other participants to add their voices to it. So as a first round of interventions from our rapporteurs, if you could share with us, consolidate all the information that you have in your head from these sessions. If you can share 3 to 5 key takeaways first from your sessions for the audience. That were the key takeaways that if you had the chance to consolidate at the end of your roundtable, or if it's your ideas for the key takeaways, and then we'll invite the others to also give their inputs. Ipsita, should we start with you? This is for Roundtable A, right?
Right, thank you. So this is for Roundtable A, which was on localizing recovery readiness. So the key takeaways were, first, that pre-disaster recovery planning is the starting point. We cannot start after the disaster. In fact, need to think through partnerships, processes, and finances in advance to be able to effectively envision a resilient recovery and act efficiently in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. The second is that effective partnerships are key to sustainable, resilient, effective, and efficient recovery. Governments are stretched during disasters, and partnerships facilitate risk sharing and efficient and effective recovery. The third is that local leaders, especially informal leaders of a community, need to be empowered with two-way communication, both top-down and bottom-up, to enable local innovation and build trust. We need to be intentionally inclusive. The fourth being recovery financing should be sufficient and transparent. Alternate sources of finances should be explored, including insurance. And the last is that the role of private sector needs to be recognized as meaningful and engaged partners. So that's it from this side.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you so much. Does anyone have anything immediately that they want to add to the, or we go through all of them and then we can come back to the audience? Nagami-san, would you like to go next? Please.
Only the key takeaways first?
First, yes, please.
The Roundtable B is enabling rapid livelihood and economic recovery. Key takeaways, we have 3 bullet points. The first one is resilient recovery must have a livelihood perspective. Jobs should be at the center of DRR interventions. The second point, livelihood resilient recovery should be carried out with long-term sustainable approaches by properly accommodating the needs of the most vulnerable. Third point, community-based local ownership in priority setting and implementation is important.
Great, thank you, Nangami-san. So we're hearing a lot from the first 2 about the importance of the community level. Of course, recovery is inherently a local level process. Hearing a lot about partnerships, hearing a lot about empowering local leaders, and particularly targeting the most vulnerable. Akash-san, would you like to go next?
Yes. So from the round C, so we discussed about the housing reconstruction and critical infrastructure recovery as a cornerstone for Build Back Better. And so we discussed many key challenges, and a sort of discussion was there. And based on that, so I picked up some key takeaways. And first one is a general point. So it is important to consider the institutional housing resilient recovery framework for different actors, including the affected homeowners and building engineers and masons and government, to realize the housing reconstruction, to meet the different needs of the affected people. Second point is to establish the clear long-term recovery plan is needed, including long-term vision of affected areas and housing reconstruction. So for this long-term recovery plan, so it is important to provide the clear guidance with transparency to affected people how to build back better recovery of housing can be realized. Because so some people may confuse after the disaster what kind of the recovery process can be happened. So in order to avoid this confusion, the government or stakeholder needs to clarify and provide a clear guidance. So it will be the recovery plan. And also, the recovery plan is not only about the housing reconstruction, so recovery of the community infrastructures and resilient livelihood must be addressed together immediately after the disasters. So not about the housing, but about the community infrastructures and the livelihood must be considered together. And third point is a clear and flexible building code needs to be formulated. So, yeah. So actually, so housing reconstruction steps must be clarified and provided it to the affected people and the related people. So the clear steps and procedures and the flexible options of the housing design or land coordination and the standard and modality of assistance and subsidies from the government, this kind of the information should be considered, and also as a building code. And also available materials for traditional practice and the reconstruction engineering techniques should be also considered for this building code. And also build back better aspect must be also considered in this building code. And the fourth point is the establishment of the legal framework, such as the law and regulations for long-term recovery process, including the housing and livelihood recovery will be indispensable. So after the disaster, many priority projects will be needed, and also the financial management and investment will be needed. So long-term management for this financial and prioritization of the project must be considered. So in order to realize this financial aspect or support, the establishment of the legal framework for housing recovery will be important. And number 5 is techno-social facilitation and welfare of vulnerable affected people coordination among stakeholders of housing reconstruction will be needed. So communication, discussion, involvement of the affected vulnerable people, including women, are indispensable for realize a smooth build back better recovery of housing. And last point is actually pre-disaster preparedness, the above point, like a recovery planning or institutional framework should be considered from the prior to the disaster happened. So, yeah, that's all.
Great, thank you so much. And it sounds like, so we already have the intersectionality of the livelihoods roundtable and the housing roundtable. We're hearing again about the importance not just of having pre-disaster recovery planning, but for recovery readiness, having a long-term vision for recovery and for development and for resilience is really important and at the heart of all 3 of these roundtables. Earlier in your remarks, we heard you mention, I think this connects with the importance of the most vulnerable populations and inclusion that we heard earlier, that about the varied needs of different people and the way they live their lives. And it relates to, I think you made a really important point, I just want to underscore it for everybody else, that it came up, this technical and social intermediary support, where it's sort of a real practical learning from that you can have a housing program, you can have the finances in place, but how it actually happens in real life, for people to be able to access resources and to rebuild their homes, that there's some connective tissue that is needed in order to ensure that they can do it. Hope I got all that right. Mona, can I ask you to intervene?
Sure, thank you, Paul. So this was Group D, the Roundtable D, and we were looking at how the engagement with the private sector can be supported, enabled, strengthened with regard to recovery. But before I begin my key takeaways, I want everyone to know who were the people who stimulated these key takeaways. So in the group, we had Akira-san representing the city of Sendai. So it's a government body that's there, city of Sendai. Then we had Mr. Saeed Saleh Al-Rahumi from the Dubai Resilience Center. Again, it's a government initiative. And we have 2 corporate sector players there, Satoshi-san from Kokusai Kogyo, and we had Takahiro Ono-san from Tokyo Marine. And of course, there was other people in the room who contributed to this learning. So now, with this background, I would like you to consider what we came up with as key takeaways. The first big point that jumped at us was how there's possibly another way of looking at what PPP means. For us, we interpreted this as plan, prepare, and partner together. So between the government and the private sector, planning, preparedness, and partnering have to be done, with honesty and depth. That was the first thing. Second, related to this is that there is still huge untapped potential vis-a-vis the role of the private sector in DRR, especially recovery. Recovery, very often, private sector role is perceived as funders for recovery through the CSR modality, etc. But there's so much more that's possible, and that's what we heard from the presenters in the panel. Then we also heard in the group that there's a need to therefore change this narrative. We need to go beyond CSR and then look at how businesses can themselves be impacted and how their own recovery is so important. And this will vary depending on the size, the type, and nature of the private sector. If it's large corporations that are looking at pension funds, what is the kind of climate risk exposure they are facing, and therefore, what is their risk and recovery strategy? And this is B2B. But if you look at B2C, what can the private sector play as a role in resuming or early recovery of essential services like education, power, telecom, etc. So these are the few things that jumped at us, and of course in terms of sharing the pre-agreements that the Sendai city has with their private sector players through the plan, prepare and partner mode. That was something very, very interesting, and of course the role of government leadership, as an enabler to encourage and enable the private sector is huge. That is, in fact, one of the foundational stones for taking this forward. I'll pause here, but there's so much more to share. It was a very exciting conversation, and I'd like to thank the panelists and the participants for such a rich conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mona. And I think we can say the same for all the roundtables, that there was so much that was shared and so much detail, and we'll try to get to as much as we can here. And then I hope our colleagues in the audience can help us to fill in the gaps. And it was great to hear again about the importance of partnership. We heard it in the first roundtable again, and not just partnerships, but also the pre-agreements you mentioned. As a part of readiness, that the essence of partnership is not just showing up when you need something, and I think that kind of dovetails with what you were saying earlier about the importance of partnership with the private sector, not the private sector as an instrument to get something. That this is and you gave the really good example of Sendai, and maybe we'll hear more about what Sendai has done when we talk about good practices. But also, I think, if I heard correctly from Mona, that it's also really important to understand what are the needs of the private sector actors in recovery, and then also to have these partnerships be a value add for both sides of this of the equation. So I think that's all terrific. Maybe we'll continue to kind of mine the moderator's memory of what happened in their sessions, and then we'll ask you to all chime in. I'm going to put two of our questions together, and because I think in some of your remarks, you've already touched on some of this, so we'll just kind of fill in anything that you didn't mention. If you can talk a little bit about really key gaps or barriers that you wanted to share with the folks who were not able to attend your session. We'll see if there's any kind of synergies with the other sessions. And then it would also be great to hear about any good practices that you wanted to bring out and share with the rest of the group. So maybe, Ipsita, can I come back to you again?
So if I just focus on something that's not repetitive, so I think a few things that came out as barriers or gaps was the fact that a siloed or a sectoral approach does not work for resilient recovery, and that recovery is a whole of society business that requires integrated approaches, and the role of all actors needs to be better understood and integrated. And conversely, it may sound a little contradictory, but it's slightly different, is that a centralized approach also alone does not work. And there is a need to understand the context and allow for flexibility and adaptation in adapting to local needs when we are planning for resilient recovery. And also the lack of resources at the local level are currently a barrier. And this is not just financial resources, but also the role of capacities, specifically technical know-how, skills for recovery and reconstruction, and data are equally important, and there is a gap right now in that. And in terms of recommendations, therefore, it is, of course, to break the silos, both within the government line departments, but also between actors by building partnerships. Communication, of course, being very, very important, and also to explore alternate sources of financing resilient recovery, and not only depending on the government institutional financing. So, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. And I think so I heard a lot. So you said on one hand, centralized approach doesn't work. Also, siloed approach doesn't work. It sounds like what we're getting to is coordination, and I think we've heard about that in a lot of the sessions today and yesterday about how difficult that is, but it's just a really critical aspect. As you said, it's a multi-sectoral, multi-ministerial process that, and coordination is absolutely essential. And I failed to mention when I was reacting to your comments in the first round, you mentioned trust, and I think it came back up again when you mentioned communication. And I think it's an intangible thing that is just so critical. And I'm going to not get this right, but someone once said that recovery moves only as fast as the level of trust that you have between the community and between the other actors involved. And I think that's something that is often underappreciated, but it's really, really important. And it goes along with the community empowerment as well. Nagami-san, can I ask you to go next?
Key gaps or barriers for the livelihood aspect is first, financial resources and income security is crucial, but it should be coupled with capacity building efforts, e.g., reskilling and upskilling to enable livelihood recovery. The second point is disaggregated data is still missing to better understand the recovery needs. Lack of livelihoods assessments as part of the pre-disaster planning creates an information gap on planning post-disaster recovery. Third point is long-term post-disaster data tracking is also missing. And to exemplify one of the efforts shared by the IOM is monitoring matrix, DTM.
Okay, wow, great. That was a lot, Nagami-san, but so we heard not just about the financial resources, but the capacity to use the financial resources that are on hand, importance of disaggregated data. I think the livelihoods assessment in the pre-disaster period is also a very interesting point. And as you mentioned, also upskilling and reskilling, I think those are also, when we're talking about building back better livelihoods, we're talking about also upgrading livelihoods and giving people, putting people on a better pathway in the recovery period. Akash-san?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'd like to add some points discussed in the Roundtable C, especially related to the key gaps and barriers. So I mentioned some key actions can be taken after this seminar. So there was some experience shared from the different countries' experience, like Nepal, Mozambique, and South Africa, and India in the discussion. And so about the key challenges, so one of the big challenges is securing the financial resource for the housing reconstruction. So this is a very general issue. And also, in order to build back better reconstruction of the housing, so ensurement of the quality of the housing is very important. And also, we have to consider about the checking system, check or diagnosis system for the housing reconstruction. And also, as I mentioned, some people will confuse how the, especially affected people, how the government will support the housing recovery. So such kind of process and the options, flexible options, should be provided at the early stage of the recovery planning. And also, we discussed about there was a discussion about the land price of affected areas. So land price of the affected areas, for example, in Japan, affected by the tsunami, the land price is decreased. So how the government can support or cover these affected land or people will be needed to be considered. And also recovery process needs to be considered from the long-term perspectives, like 30 years. So that's why there was a discussion. It's important to set the long-term vision and the long-term recovery plan, including the housing reconstruction, as well as the financial aspects also. And also, there's a discussion, different needs of the building type or design and or the land use type of the affected people. So actually, there's a discussion. So some people affected family may need to extend their house in the future. So in order to match such kind of needs for future, we have to discuss with the people before the reconstruction of the housing. Such a discussion was made. And finally, final point is, so without common understanding and agreement on the housing reconstruction and relocation, so the affected people may not follow the reconstruction plans, recovery, relocation plans. So the participants from South Africa mentioned there is an issue. So yeah, relocation plan is made, but the people didn't follow the plan because the plan, contents of the plan is not match the expectation or needs of the people. So that's why, so in order to avoid this kind of the mismatching, so we have to listen and discuss with the affected people to consider the housing reconstruction process. Yeah. Thank you very much for
That's great, and this is what I mean. There was a really deep discussion on all these issues. There's a lot of things that you just resurfaced, and I think if it's okay to say that example from South Africa, I think was really kind of eye-opening in terms of relocation. It is of course the needs of the people being relocated, but they also mentioned you're relocating them into somebody else's community, and that's also an important perspective to keep in mind, and you know, it's worth trying to get at that in the pre-disaster period so that this can be planned effectively and people can be consulted and their needs understood. I think you brought back the long-term recovery vision, and you mentioned as well that the housing reconstruction process is a long-term process. Not just the whole recovery, but just the housing reconstruction part can be a very long-term process. And so, you know, we have to be thinking about not only that the housing is suitable for people, that it is, you mentioned having flexibility in the designs that are hazard resilient, but also that they conform with the way people actually live and their preferences, but then also thinking they need some place to live, and if it takes years to reconstruct their homes, and that the interim product should just be building towards something that they want to live in. These are really important considerations. Mona, please.
Thank you, Paul. A little bit of this I've already mentioned, but I will still lay emphasis on some gaps and barriers here. The first one, of course, like I said earlier, private sector is not included enough in the discourse. That's what we felt. In fact, even in terms of, you know, the presence of the private sector in this conference, we were wondering whether this could have been enhanced in some way. So, and their engagement in practical terms in recovery, we discussed, is often limited to CSR. But there are other ways of engaging with them. So that's what we discussed. The second point that came out for us was that there is sometimes a need for better harmonization of approaches or points of reference. So our colleague from Vanuatu or Zambia, I think, they said that, you know, when they are looking at assessments, damage assessments after disasters, if there is no harmonization in the way damage is assessed, then there is some sort of a dissonance with regard to decision making on whether a building is fit to be used or not. So those kind of basic things which can be tackled by an overarching governance framework may help in such situations. The next point relates to how there is a need to further nuance and respond to the diversity of private sector entities when it comes to their engagement in recovery. So from global corporations to national giants to local level entities, MSMEs, there's an entire range. And depending on the DNA of the entity, one has to engage with them differently. And the potential there is also very, very different. So that was another point there. And then, of course, with regard to cooperation, collaboration, coordination between private sector entities at the local level, the colleague from UAE mentioned that, for example, the interdependencies between service providers who are largely private in nature. Can that be streamlined enough so that resilience, societal resilience and resilient recovery can be aimed at? But this coordination between private sector entities at the local level, between energy, telecom, education, health, how are they related to each other and how they can support together to help people bounce back better. Yeah. That's important at the local level. So these are some of the barriers that were discussed, of course, with a more constructive, reflective approach to solution seeking as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. These are all really, really important considerations, not just what we started with the other actors in partnership with the private sector, but also within the private sector ecosystem, there is great diversity, need for harmonization of approaches, coordination, and, as you say, interdependencies and the supply chain issues and that kind of a thing. I think these are all really, really important. I'm glad they came to the surface. So we've got about 20 minutes left. We want to hear from everyone here too. Can we do like a lightning round down the rapporteur line here? And just if you have one or two good practices, or if any commitments came out in your roundtables that you want to share before we ask the audience to intervene. Ipsita, sorry. Yes, please.
Okay, so I think in terms of good practices, I think one that was shared by a colleague from ADPC was on the inclusion of private sector and how they facilitated engagement between an NDMO, private sector through the National Chamber of Commerce and CSOs to negotiate, plan and finance resilient recovery, and that the private sector wants to be meaningful partners, also that they want quick solutions. They don't like to sit and discuss a lot like we do, but want quick solutions and to be able to engage and be part of the planning process and a meaningful partnership to that extent. So that's one maybe to start with. I'll just go through my notes if I have another one.
Okay, yeah, we can always come back to you. That's great. Thank you so much. So again, the really critical importance of the private sector and engagement, and we're talking through the lens of local level recovery readiness. So thank you very much for that. Nagami-san?
We had a very interesting discussion and sharing by particularly ILO that she mentioned about the nature-based, but at the same time, employment intensive. So the livelihood recovery should be job-centered, but at the same time, it should be eco-sustainable for the long-term resilience. And it has been very interesting for me and striking me that most of the displaced population can be a kind of, informal workers before the disaster. But, once they hit by the disasters, we support them to, adjust or adapt to the nature or environment, new environment, for example, for the relocation. So coupling with capacity building, reskilling, upskilling, we do this kind of, transformation is a very good opportunity for change for our own society as well. Yeah, very unique and, very striking example shared by ILO. Yeah, it was a good discussion. And also, we have to be careful about the safety net. And the safety net can be, of course, like learned from the past experience as a human being, like indigenous knowledge and also the traditional networks, community, social capital sort of thing. But we also can learn from the very recent past experience, like including COVID. COVID-19 gave us opportunity to create, transform our society to adapt to a new environment. For example, the insurance system for the, not only for the individuals, but also for the enterprises. So with mobilizing those, kind of, good past experience and tips for the future transformation, there is a kind of our clue for the safety net. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, great. So it's very interesting, as you said. So we're bringing in not just the nature-based solutions, but sort of as you said, an opportunity for transformation of people's livelihoods, and turning disaster into an opportunity for greater sustainability of livelihoods, more resilient livelihoods, and more eco-friendly livelihoods, and to give people a new opportunity. I think that's a really nice takeaway. Akashi-san?
Yes, so in the Roundtable C, so there are also some information sharing about the good practice related to the housing reconstruction or recovery planning. So one is, so Sasahara-san introduced the example of the Ofunato city. So actually, so in order to avoid the confusion and to show the clear guidance for the affected people, so Ofunato city or local government affected in Japan formulated the recovery plan, including the resilience and build back better perspectives, just within 40 days after the great East Japan earthquake. So this kind of the quite quick planning activities contributed to the smooth recovery and the reconstruction of the housing, not only housing, but the different sectors of the recovery. And also, this point actually, I think, so we maybe, in this case, 40 days, but it's not so easy, I think, for the many countries to make the recovery plan within just 1 month or 2 months. But maybe it's important, the important thing is we should consider the recovery planning pre-disaster phase, from the pre-disaster phase. For example, Tokyo Metropolitan Government, as you may know, has a pre-disaster recovery plan already. So in that plan, so what kind of the recovery projects or what kind of the recovery actions should be taken, already discussed and documented as a plan. So such kind of things can be considered. So I thought just from the example of the Osan city. And also there was a discussion about the building code in Nepal. And so actually, so Nagami-san and I also worked for the Nepal recovery reconstruction phase. Nagami-san also worked for the building code in Nepal. Actually, at the time, the earthquake, in the Nepal earthquake 2015, there was an existing building code, but it was not matched to the actual condition of the affected people. And the available materials are also limited, and also techniques are also limited, and human resource. So based on such kind of situation, so some kind of the flexible options were added in the building code that can be followed by the actually affected people. So such kind of some improvement or points can be also considered. So yeah, Nepal building code is discussed in the Roundtable C as a good practice. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. And I was in that roundtable, and I'm not sure I even caught that there was the story of how the recovery plan came together in 40 days. That's great. And for connecting this with the importance of already having a recovery plan in place and a long-term development plan in place, that it can facilitate that kind of a very quick turnaround with developing a recovery plan that reflects the real conditions of the situation. Mona, can I ask you to chime in?
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of good practices that we heard that led to the takeaways, we heard from the city of Sendai how pre-disaster collaboration agreements are really fundamental to the way recovery planning and preparedness is in place. That was one thing. And then, of course, the Sendai Bosai Tech platform that is encouraging businesses to take up disaster risk reduction as a venture itself. So that was an interesting take there. We heard from Kokusai Kogyo about how a shared plan and a blueprint for Build Back Better is so important. The Dubai Resilience Center highlighted for us the critical role of government support for engaging the private sector, and especially with regard to business continuity planning, which is something that they stress upon a lot. And that also helps them institutionalize partnerships with the private sector. Tokyo Marine taught us the value of scenario-based planning. So when we are looking at scenarios, it's possible to nuance the role of different stakeholders, not only the private sector, but also local governments, citizens, et cetera, so that helps the private sector imagine and understand what is expected of them. We heard from a couple more participants in the room. So the colleague from Brazil, she talked about a dedicated reconstruction fund that exists, which also enables the private sector to engage in recovery on more commercial terms. And the example from Thailand shared by Sisira, where he was sharing with us how the government of Thailand, after the 2011 floods, incentivized buyers of cars so that the private sector recovery could also happen, the business recovery could also be enabled. And then from UAE, we also heard about awards to responsible corporate citizens. So all of these things actually led us to articulate what kind of incentives can be put in place for private sector to participate in recovery readiness more meaningfully and mindfully. Thank you.
Well, you had a lot of good practices in your session. I think as we transition back to hearing from you, this is one of the real benefits of having, I think, that roundtable setup where the mics were just open and we had so many different countries sharing their experiences that we really had a nice opportunity to learn from each other. It's a little harder to do in kind of a panel setup. So maybe we can turn to all of you. We have, it says 8, we have a little bit more than 10 minutes left in this session. So what did we miss? Were there any key takeaways for you that you didn't hear from your roundtables that you want to share with everyone else? Or any good practices that you wanted to share? It could be your own, it could be something that you heard that you thought was particularly useful or instructive for you, or any of the other things that we've talked about, sort of key challenges or any commitments that were made in the roundtables.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for the panels. In the last 2 days, I've kind of wanted to hear anything about media. So media can play a great role as an enabler. However, it can be a challenge as well. But if we are seeking private sector partnership with the government, I think reputation, as we had discussed in the roundtable earlier today, reputation is very important to the private sector. So from that perspective, I think it could be an enabler. However, it can be a challenge. We know that. Maybe COVID-19 was a great example how media played and intensified the whole crisis before it happens. But I think we can consider that as one of the ways that at least the UAE used it properly in COVID-19 and also in the flood in 2024. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for raising that, and you're absolutely right to point out that this is absolutely critical topic, and we haven't addressed it formally in our sessions, but we talked earlier about the importance of communication. We talked earlier about the importance of trust, and media plays an important role in that. And as you mentioned, COVID-19 is a really good example of where trust was challenged sometimes, and where the reliability of information and how we communicate about information in a crisis like COVID-19, or you mentioned floods as well, in that kind of a recovery setting as well. It's really important. Thank you very much for raising that. Anyone else would like to take the mic? Do our rapporteurs have anything else that they've been holding back until now that they wanted to share? Anything else from their sessions? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so building on the discussion around trust, so actually I wouldn't mention just one case study or good practice, but it was spoken across different participants spoke about it and speakers. So I think the first thing, what it was built on is that at the community level, trust is very, very important, and trust networks is what the community functions on. And when there is an emergency, these networks break down. And when we're talking about resilient recovery, we need to rebuild these networks of trust. That said, I think what built on top of that was the fact that we need to build trust and intent in problem diagnosis and solutionizing, and also including marginalized groups, so making space for LGBTQ plus groups as well, and I think was also that understanding who are the local communities who need to be included, and going to where they can be found to be able to include them and to involve them in the process. So I think that was something which I missed, and I think we can add.
Thank you so much for raising that. I think, thank you for raising trust again, and the importance of especially at the community level. And I think it's always important, but even more challenged now that we're in our devices all the time, and where trust is, and social capital is eroding in many societies. But thank you also for bringing up the marginalized populations point, that we have to be intentional about inclusion. It doesn't just happen. So just because we want it to. And I think your point about going and seeking people out to make sure that their views and their needs are captured, I think is a really important point. We have a couple of minutes left. I'll give it back to the participants in the audience. Is there anything you'd like to add from many of your sessions? Mona's on the edge of her seat. I feel like you want to say something.
I always have a lot to say, but no, I think this whole idea of incentivizing private sector participation in various ways, hard, soft, financial, visible, invisible, that was very powerful for me, with regard to recovery. And recovery is traditionally not a space where private sector participation is loud and very forthcoming. So incentivizing them and also looking at how they can be a part of the process from the get-go, from planning to then preparing for recovery and then participating in recovery is something that was absolutely, to borrow your phrase, eye-opening for me, the way it was articulated in the group. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Mona. And maybe we can just give our rapporteurs a big hand for really a masterful job of trying to wrestle with that much information and squeeze it into little 3 and 4 minute segments. So thank you so much. You did a wonderful job. And I hope that we can continue these conversations as we go along. We can excuse you all from the stage. Thank you all.